As selfish as it seems, the dissolution of the OPL presents a fascinating opportunity to North American League of Legends, and we've already seen actions taken to accommodate OCE players into the American ecosystem from sub-professional organizations such as Maryville University. There exists realistic potential for oceanic imports to bolster the ranks of native North American talent following the ruling by Riot Games, which has granted each player with oceanic residence North American residence as well. In this video, I aim to identify these talents, their qualities, and showcase them to the wider North American community. Finally, before I truly begin, I want to set a disclaimer. I'm not trying to focus too much on a single team, and I'm trying to focus on the absolute best of OCE, so I've left out players I otherwise think should get a spot for the sake of brevity. Players you won't find on this list that I think are worth a shot in some degree in North America would include Chippies, Only, Get Back, Shock, and everyone on Legacy who isn't already on this list. I will say in advance that I already know that at least one of their players have been offered a full starting position on an LCS team. Otherwise, I'm not going to be including players with Korean residency on this list due to the fact that they'll still count as imports. So unfortunately, you will not find Tapoon, Croc, Mir, or Vitals either. Additionally, and this goes without saying, my perspective is limited. It's likely I'm forgetting someone, but this list should present a few names that caught my attention really quickly, as players that are capable of competing immediately against high-tier NA Academy players up to mid-tier LCS players, and are likely cheaper than the standard American residents. We will begin with Raze, since I would prefer to spend the bulk of the time on this video discussing lesser-known players. I think Raze was a driving force in his team's success, not to discount the accomplishments of the other starting 4 players. There are plenty of great sub-academy AD carries in North America, but Raze presents American organizations to get an ADC with a world-class pedigree fast. Raze was the king of Legacy and, by extension, the prestigious Oceanic bottom lane that has given us talents like Lost, King, and FBI. As far as gameplay is concerned, Raze is the generic, laning-centric, resource-demanding AD carry that North America has come to love, although that style has been on-again, off-again since around 2016. Raze did have the benefit of a stable, weak-side top laner in Tapoon, so it's hard to evaluate whether he himself is stylistically limited, or if this is an instance of, if it's not broken, don't fix it. Legacy did show ingenuity with their willingness to try to counterpick with AEC, which is highly unorthodox, but something I've come to appreciate. Aside from that, Raze shows versatility in his champion pool, pulling out picks that are more specialized like Draven, or mage picks like Ziggs. Some of Raze's weaknesses are fairly fixable. For example, I would sometimes see compositions drafted around Legacy's strong bottom lane. In particular, Legacy were more willing to pick Enchanter supports as opposed to the Engage supports which dominated the 2020 season. But they would then force their bottom lane to leash and would actively path away from the double range lane, and a mono carry composition too. It's compositions like these that Legacy were willing to draft in order to play to their strengths. In particular, their fantastic bottom lane and exemplary AD carry in Raze, but sometimes in game, they would fail to understand how to facilitate Raze in order to achieve victory. I think Raze could shore up on some of his basics. Things like wave 1s matter a lot more now than ever for bottom lane, especially since junglers like Nidalee, Graves, Lilia, and other tempo junglers are super high in the meta right now, although I doubt they'll stay in the meta at the turn of the season. Order's mid laner Harry may not be the flashiest player in the OPL, especially when his picks are dominated by a core of Orianna, Azir, and Zoe, but he does demonstrate great fundamentals, although these may be confounded by the actions of his jungler only. This is kind of a strange thing to highlight, but Harry plays his wave 1s and base timings extremely well. It's these sort of things that I frequently see really good players screw up on. I can't tell if Harry is calling Only in order to help facilitate his bases, or if Only is micromanaging Harry, but if it is the former, I think it's an instance of a player's small champion pool allowing them to display exemplary aspects that some players don't think about as much. Or if it's the latter, Only is just simply a genius, and he deserves to be on this list, but I really can't tell by only watching the games. However, it's these small micro-decisions that allow Harry to maximize small advantages in any matchup. He maintained a consistent advantage over Claire's LeBlanc in the loser finals of OPL playoffs, and these advantages are common throughout his games, even in disadvantageous matchups. I'm pretty comfortable saying that Harry likely has the strongest fundamentals and laning capacity out of any mid laner currently playing in OCE. and while he may possibly have issues around his champion pool, I think it's much easier to build off of those strong fundamentals as opposed to building on top of a foundation of mediocre fundamentals. Elsewhere in order is the support Ayla. He is the best bard in OCE, and his skill set is what you would expect for someone holding that title. He's good at showing up at the right place at the right time, and while his synergy with AD carry Rare was quite bad, perhaps due to the fact that Ayla wasn't a player particularly focused in lane, he was still a massive asset to his team. This may sound a little strange, but I feel like Ayla is like a better version of Chime from Golden Guardians Academy. While Chime had some mechanical issues and wasn't a profoundly strong laner, Ayla is rather solid mechanically, but has similar issues in the laning phase. They both excel at reading the map, and Ayla in particular is fantastic at engaging fights. Furthermore, he has strong synergy with jungler only, which is likely attributable to both players playing together since 2019 on Chiefs Esports. Ayla frequently uses his priority to support Only's invades, and it's this core of Only, Ayla, and Harry that is mostly attributable to Order's success in the OPL, not to discount Rare and Swiper's gameplay. Only and Ayla give Harry space to play, and Harry is capable of radiating his advantage outwards and crush the enemy through his presence alongside his jungler and support. This style, however, is indicative of how they lost to Legacy in the finals. Babip is a remarkably intelligent jungler, and Tally is so good at weak side mid that I would recommend him to Columbia College. I would say that top lane is one of the weaker, but not the weakest role in OCE, which explains Tapoon's solid performance domestically, but his struggling at the World Championship. However, Chiefs top laner Thien is a breath of fresh air in the fetid swamp that is the OPL. I was happy to see Chiefs utilize flexes that I thought were strangely absent. Obviously, Hecarim and Lilia are super dominant junglers, and are generally better in the jungle than they are in top lane, but they're more than capable of going top lane in many matchups, whereas viewing them as strictly junglers reduces the fluidity in a team's draft. It's this fluidity that Chiefs often utilize to secure multiple winning lanes without sacrificing compositional cohesion, and a lot of this versatility spawns from Thien's expansive pool. While Thien is good, he definitely has issues. He's a really resource-intensive top laner that almost always receives counterpick. In Chiefs' playoffs run, consisting of 11 games, Thien received counterpick in 9 of them. However, Thien generally did make really good use of these counterpicks, and was a consistent threat throughout the game, even on skilling picks like Kayle. In my mind, Thien's good mechanics and expansive champion pool makes giving him counterpick very worthwhile, but I do have some hesitation since I'm not sure what his stylistic versatility is like. He's clearly capable of pushing good matchups, but is he also capable of mitigating losses and losing matchups? It's hard to tell, since the situations in which this has recently occurred are too few to seriously evaluate. In one of the few games he was counterpicked, specifically by Chippy's Fiora while he was playing Camille, Thien looked uncomfortable, and made questionable decisions regarding his wave control and recall timings. Nothing outstandingly egregious, but enough to pique a bit of concern. Certainly fixable mistakes nonetheless. In the bottom lane, Chiefs holds what's likely the second or third best AD carry in the OPL in Katsuri. While it's unquestionable that Katsuri has fantastic mechanics, his statistics are unfortunately confounded by the situation regarding the support position on Chiefs. In spring, Katsuri played with a Korean support known as Korean CK. However, right before summer, CK had to return to Korea to attend to personal matters, and was incapable of competing in the OPL for the summer. At this point, the number of supports that were on the free market were way too few, and they had to promote Dragku from their academy team and role swap him from top to support in about 2 weeks before the split actually began. Dragku wasn't a terrible support or anything, but he clearly lacked the finesse of an actual support player, and this was really apparent in the laning phase, where he would make more mistakes than other supports, such as positioning too close to his AD carry on melee picks, which would make it difficult to maintain pressure in the lane. These sort of minor inefficiencies occurred on a significant enough scale that Katsuri would often be incapable of winning lanes in otherwise punishing matchups, and despite having the most Ashe games played, a champion notorious for being really abusive during the laning phase, he had some of the lowest CS differentials amongst his role. In spite of this, however, Katsuri really pumped out the damage in the teamfights, and succeeded despite the odds being stacked against him. That being said, I actually thought Dragku's performances were admirable too. Despite him being, in my opinion, the weakest support overall in playoffs, I can't really think of two roles that are so different as support and top lane, but he wasn't really a liability and he clearly learned fast. I think if Dragku was given some more time to really learn the role before the split, Chiefs may have been capable of toppling order and finishing second off the back of their strong top lane, jungle, and AD carry. They were the diametric opposites of order in playstyle, but their style was much less developed than their competition overall. That's it for the OPL players, but before this video ends, I want to run through a few OCS players that I thought had a large degree of potential, and are definitely worth a look from academy teams looking for latent stars in the region. The first of which is Hingubi from QUT Tigers. He was either the best or the second best jungler in OCS depending on what your priorities are, and he had the deck stacked against him considering his collegiate team was basically just playing for their scholarship and wasn't truly motivated to do anything regarding League of Legends in the long term. He outjungled nearly everyone at the tournament and clearly had a really good grasp on pathing, despite having laners that weren't competitive relative to their competition. It's weird, but I feel like I have to talk about it. But he is a prolific Shaco player, to the point where even in competitive, he draws bans for it. Moving on is Maximize from Mammoth Academy. He's somewhat resource heavy, not quite as much as the end, but he definitely gets the picks he wants, although perhaps not necessarily as late into the draft. He's still really young, but he's fantastic mechanically, although perhaps stylistically limited as he's still really early into his career. It would be a real shame if his development were to stop here, and I would really like to see a professional organization invest in him. I've only heard positive things about him, and his gameplay so far has been really clean. The only thing holding him back is a strange-ish champion pool, and the level of competition he's currently playing against. Calrock from Dire Cubs is the last real player I want to be covering, and he's by far the most complete player out of all of them. He's the best AD carry in OCS by far, and he was more than ready for OPL. I highly recommend him to get picked up. He's dominated each lane he's played, and while he's been playing with the best support in the OCS and Cupcake, the competition he's faced in Farmer was much greater than his teammates and a lot of the other players in OCS. I don't really have much else to say for the sake of brevity, but he's dominated players already on the precipice of OPL caliber. There's one other player I would have talked about, but he's practically the OCE Witty, and I think the stigma is too much to overcome for a North American organization to handle. In addition to that, I'm not entirely sure he's motivated to pursue a professional career in League of Legends. He was really good in OCS though, and he was either the best or the second best jungler. I just really wish he applied himself. But I suppose it makes sense that he doesn't really care due to the stability of OCE as a region. I highly recommend watching some of the OCS playoff games yourself. The few words I do spare don't really do them justice, but the sample size is way smaller relative to the OPL, and I don't really feel comfortable saying anything concrete about these guys since the caliber of competition they're competing against is dubious at best, but I do think that they're worth a look beyond a cursory glance. These players would be the future of OPL, but now the OPL has been terminated, leaving the Orphans of OCE to try to find a home elsewhere. That's all I have for this video. I'd like to thank a few people for offering me their perspective. In particular, Dire Cubs coach Rikke offered me a really in-depth look at the OPL and OCS from an inside perspective, and Coach Ginseng and Coach Curtis also lent me their perspective on the region and particular players. Their socials are in the description. Furthermore, as always, I would like to thank my graphics designer KingMe for the thumbnail on this video. He always does a fantastic job in helping my branding, and I highly recommend his services if you're looking for graphics for your own use. That's it from me. Thanks for watching.